Welcome to the second week of my free Halloween bunting-esque little motifs that we're going to be making. They all kind of start in a similar way, so taking your hook, you're going to make a magic loop, or if you prefer to work with a chain start, you can do that too. Just make sure you end up working 3 chains out of the middle. So if you're working with just the chain itself, you want 4 chains. If you're creating a chain loop that you've joined with a slip stitch, then you want 3 chains coming out of that. I'm using a doubled up magic ring because this means that my middle doesn't come undone. You're then going to work another 11 trebles, that's US doubles, into the centre, and that 3 chain that you did at the beginning is also going to count as a stitch. Because of the height of your treble, you're going to be working in multiples of 12 on each round, counting that chain 3 at the beginning as one of your stitches. Once you've done your 11 trebles and your 3 chain, so your 12 stitches now, you're going to tighten that middle if you need to do so. Then you're going to do a slip stitch into the top of the first treble that you did, not into the top of the chain 3 but into the treble itself. This means then on our subsequent rows we'll work around that slip stitch in order to hide the bars and you get a more seamless finish. For your second round you're going to chain 3 and then working into the same stitch that you did your slip stitch into the base of the chain, you're going to work another treble, a US double. You're then going to continue to work 2 trebles, that's 2 US doubles, into each stitch as you work around. Once you get to the end of your round, you're going to work that last stitch around the slip stitch that you did into the top of the last treble of the previous round, and then you'll join with a slip stitch into the first treble of this round. Then you're going to continue like you did previously and chain 3. Then for round 3 we've got to work in sets of 3 stitches, so we'll do our increase again in that first stitch, so doing a treble, a US double into the base of the chain, and then working just 1 treble, US double, into the next stitch. You'll then continue to work 2, 1, 2, 1 all the way around. Then, like with the previous round, once you get to that final stitch, you're going to use that slip stitch that you did at the end of your previous round and do your final stitch in there. And then join with a slip stitch into the top of the first treble, double. Now for round 4 we need to work in sets of 4 stitches. So again you're going to do the chain 3 and then you're going to work the first stitch into the same stitch as your chain 3, so into the base of the chain you're going to work a treble, a US double, and then into the next 2 stitches you'll work 1 treble, US double each. So now you've got a set of 4 stitches that you will repeat. So you'll do 2, 1, 1 all the way around. The 2 being your increase, so you're doing 2 trebles, US doubles into the same stitch, and then 1 individual stitch into each of the next 2 stitches, each working in a multiple of 4. Like your previous rounds, when you get to the end, you'll work that final stitch around the slip stitch that you did at the end of the last round, and then fasten off with a slip stitch into the top of that first stitch. Now we need to move on to creating our jaw. To level off the edge, what you want to do is work a chain of 2, and then I work what is called a linked treble or a linked double for the US. So you're going to go into the second chain from your hook, yarn over to pull up a loop as if you're doing a double crochet, but then work the remaining of your stitch as you would usually. This connects the chain to your treble, US double. Then into the next stitch, you're going to work a half treble, that's a US double, half double, and then you're going to work a double into the next 5 stitches. That is a US single into the next 5 stitches. Once you've done those 5 stitches, again you're going to work a half treble, a half double for the US, into the next stitch. And then you'll finish off with a treble into the next stitch, that's a US double. Then as you work the subsequent rows, I like to do the linked stitch at the beginning of the row as it gives a tighter beginning. So again, you're going to insert into the second chain from your hook as if to do a double crochet, a single crochet for the US, but then insert into the stitch that you wish to complete your stitch into and complete your treble, US double, as normal. If you're not happy doing a linked treble stitch, that's absolutely fine. You can just do your treble stitches as usual. It just means that your edges will be slightly looser, and you may find that when you do the edging stitches, you want to work into the treble around the chain as well, just to make sure everything is nice and sturdy. As you work along the jaw, you'll have 9 stitches to work into. Because we're not counting here these 2 chains as a treble, we're just going to be ignoring them entirely. So you end up with doing 9 trebles, US doubles, into one into each stitch as you go. Then just to finish the jaw off, we do the same again. So you're going to chain 2, and again I do the linked stitch, so I'm inserting my hook to get my yarn over to pull up a loop, and that creates the first yarn over my treble, and then I can insert into the stitch that I want to do, and then I can continue to work trebles down the line until I'm finished. So I've done 9 trebles for this row. Unlike with our sugar skull, we're going to fasten off here, so just pull through and then you can just trim your yarn. Now, because with Frankenstein he has this classic squared off top of his head look, with our edging, while we are going to go around the outside, we're also going to add some longer stitches to create the corners at the top of his head. To do this, I have placed a stitch marker in the 20th stitch onwards from the last stitch of where you straightened off the jaw, which puts you opposite the middle double crochet, single crochet where you straightened that off, because this will then become the midpoint of the top of flattening his head to make sure it's symmetrical. Then also place a stitch marker into the 8th stitch, because we need this many stitches essentially to square off as we go around, taking into consideration the same pattern that we used when creating the jaw. However, because we're going further out along the curve of the circle, we will need to use some longer stitches. So reconnecting your yarn into the bottom of the one, if you want to, you can also, like with the sugar skull, start off in that corner and just work your way around. When you get to the corner stitch there, you're going to do just a double crochet, a US single, a chain, and then as you move around the corner, you'll do another double crochet, US single, into the same stitch. You'll then proceed to work a double crochet into each of the raw stitches, 2 double crochets into each of the sides of the trebles as you move down back towards the head. Often people will say you need to do 3 stitches to the side of a treble. However, because of the width of the stitches, I find that 3 can often be too many, and you don't want it to start to ripple, whereas with 2 it's a bit more evenly spaced. You could add an extra in between every other row to kind of have 2.5 stitches if you wanted, but 2 works perfectly fine. Once you've worked into all of those raw stitches, you're then going to be moving on to the head. To do this, you're going to skip the first of the unworked stitches after the jaw, and then work 2 double crochets, that's 2 US single crochets, into the next stitch. You'll then proceed to do a 1 double crochet or single crochet for the US into the next 9 stitches. Of those last 3 stitches is where we hit the marker. The marker is signifying the quarter of the circle, and it is the middle of the double crochets matching up to how we have shaped the bottom of the jaw. And then you'll proceed to do 2 more after that for the the last 2 of the 5 that you did underneath. You're then going to do a half treble, that's a US half double, into the next stitch, then a treble, a US double, into the stitch after that. Then you're going to work what is known as a double treble in the UK and a treble in the US, which means you yarn over 2 times before you insert your hook into the stitch. Then into the next stitch, we're going to do a triple treble, what? Also known as a double treble in the US, which means you're going to yarn over 3 times before you insert your hook. You'll then proceed to do another triple treble or double treble for the US into the same stitch before you do 2 chains to form your corner. Then, to turn the corner, we'll do another 2 triple trebles, US double trebles, into the exact same stitch you previously worked your triple trebles into. You'll then continue now to work across the flat of the head, the top of the head. So you'll do a double treble into the next stitch. This means you're going to yarn over twice before you insert your hook. And then when you've pulled back through and pull up a loop, you yarn over and pull through 3 times. Then into the next stitch you're going to do a treble, a US double, into the next stitch a half treble, a half double for the US, and then proceed, much like you did at the bottom of the skull, to do 5 doubles, that's 5 singles for the US, across, and that stitch marker becomes the third of those doubles that you do, and is therefore like matching up with the bottom. You'll then proceed to work the exact same stitches around the corner as you go again. So you'll do a half treble into the next stitch, so half double for the US, yarning over before you go in but pulling through all three. Then to the next stitch you'll treble, so yarning over first, pulling through two, pulling through two. Then you're going to work your double treble, which is your treble for the US, so you yarn over twice before you go in. Then you're going to be working your triple trebles, which is really hard to say. And you'll work 2 triple trebles, 2 chains and 2 triple trebles, which is a double treble for the US, into that next stitch to create that corner. Getting into the rhythm of doing the different size stitches I often find is quite baffling to my brain, so I, as you can see, a couple of times I've had to unpick and restart just because I've done the wrong number of yarn overs at the beginning. Now that we've done our 2 triple trebles or double trebles to the US, we'll do 2 chain sticks around the corner and then proceed to work another 2 triple trebles, double trebles into the same stitch. Don't worry about the holes that are created at the corners because we will be covering that up with his iconic hair. Once you've done your triple trebles, you're then going to do a double treble, a US treble, into the next stitch, so yarn over twice before you go in. Then a treble, so just yarning over the once into the next stitch along, which is a US double. Then into the next stitch you will do a half treble, which is a US half double, which is yarning over but pulling through all three. Then you'll proceed to do double crochets into the next 9 stitches to mirror the other side of the head. Once your 9 stitches are done, you're then going to do 2 doubles, that's 2 singles, into the next stitch for an increase, skip the next stitch and continue to work your 2 singles slash doubles per treble up that raw edge side. Again, spacing them 2 per treble just means that you get a nice amount of stitches, it won't ripple and it won't pucker. When you reach that corner stitch, so you're going to the top of that first stitch, you'll just do your double, single, chain 1 and then do a stitch into the same stitch again, another double, single into the same stitch, and then proceed to work your doubles, singles to the final stitch you've worked. Then you can fasten off. Either you can join with a slip stitch into the top of that first stitch, or you can do what is known as an invisible finish. Here you can see I insert my hook into the top of the second stitch of the round, yarn over and pull that back through underneath the stitch, making sure to leave it loose enough to make it look like a stitch on the top. Inserting my hook through the middle, so just up through underneath the back loop, to then pull that down through. This forms another top of stitch essentially above first stitch, making it invisible. And here you can see we've got this nice squared off head and it just starts to really look recognisable. Now we need to make his hair, so you have 2 options on how to do this. Either you can do a chain start and you'll chain 20, or you can do what is known as a chainless foundation, in which case you will chain 3, which is what I'm doing here. Then I'm going to insert my hook into the second chain from my hook to do my yarn over, so similar to the jaw where I've done the link stitch. Then going to insert my hook into the first chain, pull up a loop, but then I'm going to do a chain in through that first stitch. Then I'm going to continue to complete the rest of that stitch as normal. So essentially you create the chain as you work along. As you do your subsequent stitches, you'll insert your hook into the bottom of that stitch as so. So just you'll end up being able to see the kind of more obvious where it needs to go. It's really hard to show in black yarn, which is really silly. So you create a chain and then you do your stitch. So rather than creating all of your chains first and then working back down through them, which can be a little restrictive at times and not as stretchy, this just allows you to kind of work it as you go. So rather than having to get the number of chains right, you can just kind of do the number of stitches that you require, which I really like as a process. And it just allows you to create a length and know exactly how big that length is, because oftentimes with chains I find that you do them and then the chain you're like, oh yeah, that's the right length, but then the actual stitches themselves aren't right. And this is why we like tension squares. But do I do a tension square? No. So just continuing this until you've got 18 stitches. If you want to do the traditional chain start, you absolutely can. So you'll just chain 20 stitches, and then starting from the third chain from your hook, you'll do your trebles or US doubles all the way to the end. Likewise, you can also do the link stitch at the start if you feel so inclined, but you really don't have to. Once you finish doing your first row, you'll be able to see that it is the same width as your skull. And then we're going to create a kind of spiky fringe situation in the front of his head. So to do so, we're going to chain 3. You're then going to do a slip stitch into the second chain from hook after you've moved your head out of the way. You're going to do a slip stitch into the second chain from your hook and then a double into the next chain along. This creates little spikes as we go along his front. You're then going to join that into the top of your trebles, skipping 3 stitches, or going into the 3rd stitch rather. So you have 18 stitches on the previous one and you end up working 1 spike per 3 stitches, so you end up with 6 spikes. So you're going to chain 3, slip stitch into the first one, double, US single into the second one, and then do a slip stitch to attach it into the trebles again. Then as you begin to reach the end of the hair, you'll simply just join that last spike into the top of the final stitch, your final treble double from the previous row. You can then fasten off and leave yourself a long tail for sewing the hair onto the head. So now you just want to take your darning needle and you're just going to line up the hair and then simply do a whip stitch around the top of the stitches and come down the side as well. I've not gone into the main part of the head with my sewing, I've literally just gone over the top. So literally just doing a whip stitch, so going through the green, around the black as well, and that's literally just the easiest way to do it. Now we need to create 2 eyes, so to do so you're going to start in the round again. So again, I've done a double wrap magic loop or magic ring, but you could work into your chain or like your chain loop. So again, if you're going to do your chain start, you want to chain 2, that's including the one for the height of the stitch, or if you're doing your chain start, make sure you chain 1 out of your chain loop. You're then going to do 6 doubles, US singles into that, and then tighten it if required. Because I'm doing mine with a double loop, I end up pulling a little bit first to see which one it is that moves in the middle, then tighten that to then tighten it entirely. Then you're just going to do a slip stitch into the first stitch to fasten off. Leave yourself with a long tail end once you've cut your yarn so that you can use it for attaching. Simply do so with a yarn needle, and then I'm just holding my eyes in place and swinging on a hope and a prayer to make sure that they're level, which by some magic they actually ended up being. And I'm literally just going through the eye and then through the green. Then we need to add on some details for the scar and the mouth. So you're going to take your yarn up through from the back with just a length of yarn, and then go through to create the length of the scar, and then just using the same technique you'll do the crosses, the stitches across the scar as well. You can do this in whichever places you like. Just make sure you're not pulling your yarn too tightly. Because of the nature of crochet fabric, if you pull too tightly it will just crumple. So you want to make sure that you're keeping those stitches nice and like tight-ish to the surface, but not too tight. You're then going to use the same technique for the mouth. So you'll do the centre line first. So I like to space mine so it's 1 stitch away from the edge and then along to the other side, literally just straight across. And then you'll use the teeth in order to kind of hold that into place. Again, like with the scar, you don't want to pull too tightly as you don't want to pucker your fabric. So just insert your hook so that it's level and then just pull it through. And then likewise, you'll do the same centre stitching as on the scar. Similarly, I like to space the first tooth 1 stitch away from the edge, thereabouts, and then space the other tooth in the same way. Then you can work the stitch in the middle and then centre off between the 2 of them. Because you've got an odd number of stitches, it's actually quite easy to do this. We are so nearly there now. So you've done your main Frankenstein. He's got a mouth, he's got a scar. But what does any good Frankenstein need? He needs his neck bolts, of course. To do this, you're going to start by working a chain of 8. This will help you create the length of the bolt, but also the top of the head of it as well. So you're going to work 8 chain stitches. The first 4 will become the body of the bolt later on, and the second 4 are going to become 1/2 of the top of the bolt. You're going to work a half treble, a half double into the third chain from your hook, and then another into the next chain along. Then going to work another 4 chains. This will create the other side of the top of the bolt, and work a half treble, a half double for the US, into the third chain from your hook, and then into the next chain along. You'll then work a slip stitch into the base of that second half treble that you did, the last work chain from the original chain essentially, and then you'll work a double into each stitch to the end, to the last 4 chains. That's a US single into the 4 chains to the end. You'll then fasten off and use the yarn tail for attaching. Here you can see I'm just using a really simple whip stitch to connect it to the head, just spacing them just below the jawline, or just where the jawline meets the head, next to the mouth, and there you go, there you have it, your nice finished Frankenstein skull. Be sure to subscribe to get a free pattern every single week.